All right, so by this point, we've talked about formula syntax, we've talked about cell reference types, we've covered common errors and auditing tools. Now it's time to shift gears and talk about how to work efficiently. And to do that, we're going to cover three different flavors of shortcuts: control shortcuts, function shortcuts, and alt key tips. And these are going to turn you into an absolute Excel productivity machine, guaranteed. So let's start with control shortcuts. I'm going to cover 5 that I use pretty much on a daily basis, starting with Control Arrow. Now, all this does is it jumps to the last cell in a data region in the direction of the arrow. Now, when you add Shift to the mix, Control Shift Arrow, that does the same thing. It jumps to the last cell in the region. It just creates a selection along the way. Now, Control Home and End will behave in a very similar way, except it will jump straight to the home cell, which is the top left corner, or the end cell, which is the bottom right cell in a region. And just like Control Arrow, holding Shift will create a selection at the same time. Fourth option is Control Period. Now, this one's a little bit more nuanced, but what this does is allows you to jump straight to each corner within a selected cell range. So once you already have a large selection, it can be a little bit difficult to navigate to different portions of that selection. Control Period is a great way to help you do that. And then finally, Control Page Up, Page Down simply switches between your worksheet tabs, either moving to the left with Page Up or to the right with Page Down. So quick little illustration here. Let's say we've got this data range from A1 through G11. If we were to use the Control Shift right arrow from cell A1, that would create a selection extending all the way out to G1. From there, with that selection in place, if we used Control Shift arrow down, that would expand our selection again all the way down to row 11. And we could get to this same end result right there from our first step, cell A1, using the Control Shift End shortcut as well. So these are all very simple. It's really just a matter of practicing them to get that muscle memory going. So perfect segue. Let's jump back into our Formula 101 Excel workbook and practice some of these control shortcuts. All right, perfect. So here we are in the Section 2 Formulas 101 workbook, and I'm in the Shortcuts tab. What you'll see here should look familiar if you've taken my Data Analysis with Excel Pivot Tables course. This is our IMDb movie database. And it's not a huge file, but it's big enough that it doesn't fit into one clean view. We've got about 17 columns worth of data coming out to column Q. And if we scroll down, we've got a little over 3,700 rows. So again, not huge, but also not tiny either. And just to give you a sense of what we're dealing with, we've got movie titles, release dates, and a bunch of attributes, whether it was color, black and white, the genre, the language, the country, all sorts of good stuff here. And again, this is the same data set that we use for much of the pivot table course as well. So let's say you needed to select all of the titles right here in column A, and you couldn't just click on the column header itself. You had to select only the cells containing values. Now, the really slow way to do it is to grab A1 and move your mouse down and wait as you scroll. Show of hands, how many people have done this? You know, it works okay with a couple hundred rows. There we go. We've gotten to the end with a few thousand rows. But what if you're dealing with 500,000 rows? You know, that quickly becomes really, really inefficient. And I'm going to scroll back up the slow way. A slightly better approach would be to just click A1, scroll all the way to the bottom, then press Shift and click A3726. That'll give you that same selection, but you still had to do that manual scroll, which is a little slower than I'd like. This is where that Control Shift arrow shortcut is so important. Starting with A1, you're just going to hold Control, hold Shift, arrow down, boom, you've got your whole selection right there. Now, one thing to note that's important is that this tool selects to the end of your contiguous data region. Now, contiguous means no breaks, no blanks, no gaps in your data. So if one of these titles didn't exist, like the pirate, and we went back to A1, Control Shift arrow down, note that it stops because Excel only sees this as the data region. So something important to keep in mind, it can be helpful to identify blanks in a column, but it can also be a little bit dangerous if this blank was halfway down the screen and we thought we had selected the entire column. So keep that in mind. Let's Control Z to get that pirate title back. And now let's just practice the others, starting from A1. So hold Control, arrow right jumps us all the way down to Q1, arrow down takes us to the bottom right corner, Q3726, arrow left brings us to column A, and arrow up takes us back to A1, and I'm holding Control that whole time. Now, without even releasing Control, I can add Shift into the mix. Arrow right moves in the same way, it just creates a selection at the same time. Arrow down extends that selection down to my full data range. Arrow left pulls the selection back to just column A, and arrow up brings me right back to A1. And remember, Control Home and End and Control Shift Home and End work the same way. Control Shift End is going to basically do the same thing that I just did, but eliminate a step. So that takes me all the way down, creates a selection all the way to the bottom right corner of my data region. And this is where that Control period shortcut can be really helpful, because once I've got this selection here, now it actually becomes a little bit trickier to navigate within this selection. I can't use my Control shortcuts anymore because that would remove my selection. I can't use Control Shift because that would change my selection. But what I can do is use Control period. And see how that jumped me up to the top right corner, Q1? If I press period again, it takes me to the bottom right. Again, takes me to the bottom left. One more time takes me to the top left. So again, Control period, great way to navigate within an existing selection. And last but not least, we've got our Control page up, page down options. And that's as simple as holding Control, pressing page up to move to the left, or page down to move to the right. And this is a very easy way to navigate through the worksheet and quickly see what you've got in each tab. So there you have it, Control shortcuts, huge time savers, definitely worth taking the time to memorize.